Thank you,
Thank you,
Zoom
Zoom lady.
lady.
Hey kids, welcome to episode 3 of the hashtag I'm Writing Blueprint Challenge, aka our Blueprint for a Book series. As always, hashtag I'm Writing is the weekly podcast for fun, fresh, actionable writing advice for writers in all genres, fiction of any kind imaginable, nonfiction, memoir. We are here to help you get inspired and get the work done. I am KJ Dell'Antonia, author of 2 novels, The Chicken Sisters and In Her Boots, as well as the nonfiction book, How to Be a Happier Parent, although I have been accused of that being fiction or possibly a blank notebook. That was also suggested. But no, it is nonfiction, it is journalism, and it actually could potentially help. But enough. No, there's never enough about me. I'm also the former editor and lead writer of The Motherlode at the New York Times. And all right, I think I'll stop and let Jenny introduce herself now.
I'm Jenny Nash. I'm the author of 11 books in 3 genres. I'm the founder and CEO of Author Accelerator and creator of the Blueprint Framework for Writing Better Books.
So my usual co-hosts, Jess and Serena, will pop in from time to time, but for this 10-episode series, it's mainly going to be me, Jenny, and our book coach guests, and we're going to focus in specifically on books, creating a blueprint that will take you from take a book idea from amorphous blob to solid plan. So whether you're at the inspiration stage, have a few chapters written, or you're sitting on a big chunk of draft that just isn't quite coming together, which is going to sound familiar to a lot of people, including me, this series is going to help you get things in shape and make taking your idea to the next stage easier. But wait, if a book is not in your plans, don't worry, keep listening. This is still going to be fun. We're going to have a great time talking about what goes into creating the strong structure that underlies all the books we read, which makes reading way more interesting. And it also might spark some ideas that could lead you to a book idea somewhere down the road.
So today, our guest book coach is Rona Goffstein. She is an Author Accelerator certified book coach who specializes in helping writers of genre fiction who've never given up on their dreams of being an author. She helps them develop, write, and revise their novels. And she herself is an author of contemporary romance. And I believe, Rona, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe you do independent publishing.
I do. I've been published with small presses, and then later this year, I am going straight to or into self-published, so independent. Yeah.
So that's going to be very helpful in our discussion about market.
That's right, because in the first 2 episodes, we went high level. We talked about your why and your point and why those are key things to consider in writing the book that you want to write that will reach the readers you want to reach. But in this episode, we're going to get uber practical, because while you need a why and a point to reach readers, you also need to know something about those readers, where they hang, what they're looking for, and how you can become a part of it. So, all right, we're going to talk market, nitty gritty, all the things. Ready, set, go.
So I want to start by talking about what we mean when we say you've got to pay attention to the market, because a lot of people freak out when they hear that, and they freak out in 2 different ways. They freak out because they say, I don't want to have to market my books. I just want to write them. I just want to sit and write them and have somebody pay me and to do all the other things. So that's one thing that comes up when we talk about the market. And the other thing that comes up is people think that we mean, oh, you'll have to write to the market, meaning if vampire novels are hot, you should write a vampire novel. And that is not what we mean at all. Thinking about the market, thinking about your reader, these are just smart things that a writer who wants to be read is going to do. So do you guys want to say anything about those 2 ideas before we get into it?
I think for me, one of the things that I see happening when somebody is drafting a first draft and I tell them to think about the market is they kind of get very nervous. It's too soon for them to think about that. And I'm reminded of Terry Pratchett's quote, which is that your first draft is you telling the story to yourself. And I remind them that that is still the case with their first draft, but that they will write a stronger first draft if they have an idea of their ideal reader and their market before they start it. So while the first draft will still be you telling you the story, it will be better for knowing this information. It will be better for you knowing who else you're telling the story to beyond you.
Yeah, that's really excellent advice, and a really good place to start. Obviously, it's always a combination of what you're called to write, what's in your heart, and we talked about that in our episode on why. That's why we start there before we even start thinking about the market. But yeah, knowing who's going to read this, where are they going to find it in the bookstore, how are they going to encounter it? You've got to be able to think about those things. KJ, at what point in your process do you start thinking about that reader?
Well, I sometimes find it hard to say I have a process when I'm on writing book 3. I don't know when do you get an official process? Does the process fairy come and
yeah,
dot
it's
you?
book 3. You're there.
Oh, okay, cool. Process fairy. And then Jenny's the process fairy. That's what we've learned today.
Terrific. Let's get her some wings.
So I think about the reader right away. I come from journalism and from magazines, so styling the work that I am doing in order to reach the readers of the publication that I am working with has always been a part of how I was trained. And I think that as a result, whether I'm thinking about writing nonfiction books, and I actually have a second nonfiction book, which was called Reading with Babies, Toddlers, and Twos. And whether it's something like that or whether it's fiction, I'm thinking from the very beginning, partly it's like, how do I reach readers? But partly it's about reader expectations, and figuring out where on the shelf the book is going to sit and how to not disappoint someone who takes a book off of that piece of the shelf.
That's right. It's interesting that you mentioned magazines. My first job out of college was at well, actually, it was my second job. My first job was at Random House. My second job was at a magazine. It was a Slick City magazine called New York Woman. And I learned so much there about writing books, actually. But you reminded me of a thing. We used to have a conversation all the time, that there would be a story we would want to do, and the editorial team would have this discussion, and they'd be saying, well, that's a glamour story. And they meant Glamour magazine. Or that's a Mademoiselle story. That's not really our story. And I was like, what are they talking about? These stories are all the same. But when I started learning and paying attention, there was a very different person who picked up one magazine versus another, and what they would expect to see with the exact same story, whether it was whatever, Sarah Jessica Parker thing or whatever, that's what made the magazine, is that angle or that perspective or that way of looking at it. And it's exactly the same thing with a book. You could have a same kind of story, but if it's a cozy mystery, it's going to be different than if it's a romance, and if it's a romance, it can be different than if it's a thriller, and on and on and on. So it's just a great way of thinking about reader expectation and where the book's going to sit on the shelf.
It's a perfectly fine. I mean, I'd say this all the time, so I won't belabor it too hard here. But we did a whole episode with Saricia Glass, which I will link to in the show notes, just talking about sitting down at the beginning and thinking about, well, where am I most likely to reach readers? And if you feel most comfortable in the cozy genre, or you feel most comfortable in a rom-com genre, or you want to tell your story as a memoir, or maybe the memoir feels too personal, so you want to do sort of a memoir nonfiction hybrid, or maybe you're even just going to take this nonfiction topic that is a deep personal concern for you, but you're going to take it into a really more nonfiction, a more prescriptive or more descriptive level. There's different kinds of that. It's fair to think about both which of those things am I most comfortable in, and also which of those things is going to find the people that I want to talk to. You're going to find different people if you write a work of literary fiction than if you write something called 4,000 Weeks, Time Management for Mortals. Which is great. I love that book.
It's a good book.
if we leap way to the end, Rona,
Mhm.
way to the end of the process, when if you're independently publishing your book, you're selecting categories where your
You are.
reader's going to find your book, very very specific categories, and you get generally three, to just in a general term, and that's where becomes very real when you have to literally
Mhm.
pick. So do you want to talk about that moment and how that impacts a writer at the beginning of the work thinking about the marketplace?
Absolutely, because it starts with, and KJ's brought this up already, it starts with genre, which can be very big and broad to start with. You have romance, women's fiction, literary fiction, all that. So you have those big, broad genres. But within those, you have the smaller ones. So within mystery, you have cozy and you have amateur and you have female sleuths. You can go that far down to find the reader who is most going to love your work. So in romance, you go, as you mentioned, I write contemporary, then there's paranormal, then there's romantic suspense. You in contemporary, you have small town, you have urban, you can keep drilling down. And so that the first set of readers, the first people who find you are the ones who are going to love you, or most likely to love you the most. You are what they're looking for. You've written the thing that touches their emotions the most. That's what they go to books for, is the type of story you're telling.
Why should we look at this early in the process?
I think it keeps you from from veering off a little bit. You will, it's not that people can't find you if you write a contemporary novel with paranormal elements, set both in a small town and in a big city. You can mix them up. As you said, you can still write the book of your heart. But you're going to have to work a little harder when you find the people who are going to love it as much as you do. Because if you want to read something and write some, chances are there are other people who want to as well. But when you know it in advance, especially when you get to the revision process, you then start to look at the things that genre, that category, those readers love, and you make sure you're layering it in. So it's not just the mystery, it's what this woman goes through as she solves it. It's the things she faces, it's her friends in peril, it's her worry about her pet. Because within cozy you have the pets and the crafts and the food and the and all the other parts of it, and you get to be very specific about what they love and what you love, and making sure that's in there. And that you had said earlier, that genre readers have an expectation and you don't want to disappoint them.
So in fiction, you also end up sort of using this, there's a really specific place when you want to use this market research, which is when you're querying, and this is way later down the road, but you're talking comps. So it's great to have a list of books that your book would sit on the shelf next to. And in nonfiction, there's a place even early in the process when you need to get into this. And it's both of those things. It's comps. So nonfiction is different, as we've talked about, and as probably everybody knows, in that you typically pitch it on a proposal, not memoir. On memoir, you often write the memoir and do a proposal. So yay for more work, but it's true. And in nonfiction, you're going to need a list of comps, so books that your book would sit next to, and you're probably going to need an actual description of what your market might look like and who is going to buy the book. And there is no harm in coming up with that for your fiction too, and thinking, who am I telling? First, you tell the story to you. Sure, that's great. But who am I going to tell it to next?
Yeah, I think it's the John Cheever quote that talks about the reader completes the circle, with the writer. And I love that one. I love the image of it. And I always think of comp titles. I always think of comp standing for two things. It's what you're most compatible with, the titles you're most compatible with, and the authors and books that are your competition. it's both, because why are they going to choose your book in this genre, of which there are probably many others, over another one? So when you write your blurb, or when you write to an agent in a query letter, that's part of what you're also showing. Look, there are other books like this out there, which means there's an audience and a market and buyers, which is what publishers really want. They want buyers. We call them readers, they call them buyers. But it's also a place to say, and this is where I am distinct from the competition. So this is why the readers who buy this will buy this, but this is why they might choose me over that. I added this twist, or I go deeper into this. This is where your point, which you've talked about, can come back to help you, because your point can very much drive a query letter or a blurb. You know, that underlying powerful oomph is hard to just describe that way, but it is. It's that extra point where you can connect to an agent, to an editor, and to a reader.
I think what we're really talking about when we talk about why to think about the market early in the process is we're talking about your intention. And I think a huge benefit of thinking about the market is actually for the writer to convince yourself, I am writing to be read. I am writing because I would like this to be bought. I am writing because I would like this to be my career. You know, whatever goal you have, a lot of writers have to convince themselves of that. And it's why they rub up against the, oh, I don't want to market. I just want to write and have somebody else do that. It's kind of a protective mechanism of separating themselves from the, the marketplace. But making yourself think about it helps you to put yourself in that headspace that, yes, this is what I'm doing. And I also believe that intention on the nonfiction side can really make or break what that book is going to be. Because if my intention, I just had an experience this past weekend. It was the year anniversary of, there were 2 deaths in my family a year ago, one right after the other. And my husband, the person who died was my stepfather, but he was very, very close to my husband. And my husband lost really one of his best friends. And when the year anniversary of the death came, he was just really feeling the grief, and he was kind of falling apart. And we were going out of town for the weekend, and I was scrounging for a book to bring in my stack of books. My stack of books is vast. Yeah, this is a curated bookshelf. My stack of books it's like anyway. And I'm shuffling through there, and I pulled out 2 books on grief. I happen to love books on grief. I have always loved books on grief. I have many, many, many of them, and I read a lot of them. And so I pulled 2, and one was a book of little short snippets from famous writers and thinkers about grief. So kind of like a 2-page spread, a little bite-sized bit. And then the other is a book called The Wild Edge of Sorrow by Francis Weller, which is a very sort of deep and spiritual and intense dive into grief. And it's a book that has been recommended to me many times, and mine is just dog-eared. And my husband's not the kind of guy who reads any of these sorts of books. But I thought, I'm going to grab these 2 books, and I'm gonna ask him if he would like to take one of these on the weekend. And for me, this was a gesture of, I see what you're feeling. I understand that it's hard for you. Maybe I'm not the right person to help sometimes, but these books could be great. And which do you want? And I think about, so he picked the short snippet one, which did not surprise me, right? For this particular application. But that's how you think when you're thinking about, okay, I want to write a book about grief. Well, how do you want that to be received by the person at the other end? How are they going to encounter that book? What are they going to do with it? How are they going to experience it? And there's different ways of coming to a book about grief, right? Those are 2 really different kinds of books. And someone in a different space would pick the other one. I own both of them. And so that intention of marketplace is so important at the beginning, because you have to know which one of those books you're writing before you can write that book. KJ, you sound like you're like grabbing things. You're like
She's got something.
So again, this is funny because this goes a little bit back to our last a special series that we did together where we talked about books on writing. But when it comes to nonfiction, my favorite book on book proposals, which my nonfiction agent gave to me when I started writing a book proposal, is Eric Maisel's The Art of the Book Proposal, which I'm holding if you're watching on YouTube, but otherwise you can look it up. And the thing that he does that's really interesting is he talks about the different kinds of books that you can write, specifically in nonfiction, that go to a particular idea. So say, I mean, I kind of have, I was looking for this to read it to you, but basically he'll be like, okay, say you want to write about rowing. You could write 20 ways to become a better rower as a woman. You could write 20 things I thought about what we think about when we think about rowing. You could write rowing your way through grief, an experience. You could write, the waves, how rowing changed my life. So, you've got this, and all of those are, great approaches to the market and great approaches to the topic. And you need to decide both which one of those works for you. And it's fair to think about, well, which one of these can I sell? The waves, how rowing changed my grieving life. That might be easier to sell if you have more of a platform. 20 ways to row better as a woman, that might be something that you can sell if you're a rowing expert, but not a writing expert. So, when we think about market, there's a like this is a huge topic. Like we could do 10 episodes on market alone. But yeah, which of those books is the right one for you is one thing to think about. And which can I sell? That's a fine thing to think about.
I think going back to something Jenny said is that going through this process will change your writing. It will change the process for you as a writer. Because especially if you've never stopped and thought about the person on the other end of your book. I went through the blueprint process with a writer recently. And after she did this section on creating her comp titles and diving into who her ideal reader was, she got really emotional thinking about somebody holding her book one day, thinking and picturing and feeling what it might be like to know somebody was reading her book and going on this journey of this character who's only lived in her head. It changed things for her. It's not that she wasn't serious about writing the book before, but this took it to a different level, to a deeper level. And I reminded her to take it even further, that if she doesn't write this book and complete this book, and because she's nervous now about when she finished the blueprint, she's like, I have to start writing. I reminded her, I said, yes, but you remember that reader who's like looking forward to this, who, and the character who you didn't see in books that you wish you had, time to give this book to them, time to start. Because the planning part's great, but then you do have to do it.
That's beautiful. And, the reason I created the blueprint to begin with was I was really tired as a book coach of having people come to me time after time after time after time and not have answered these questions. Like they would have complete manuscripts that they had worked years on. And I would say, so what exactly, which genre is this? Because it kind of jumps through three different ones, at three different places of the novel. And they'd be like, oh, I don't know. I never thought about that. Or who's your ideal reader? When would they come to your book? What else are they reading? And what are the comps? Oh, I don't know. I haven't thought about that. And it was so frustrating to me. They hadn't thought about any of these foundational questions. And it was frustrating because I just knew all they were doing was causing themselves a huge amount of pain and having to redo things. And like KJ, I know you've just finished a grueling editing and revision process on your second novel. So we're not talking here about pushing some button and having it be easy. It's never easy. And you're always going to be revising and rethinking and reconfiguring, and oh, it's really about this, and oh, this is really going to happen. All that is still going to happen, but doing so with intention and understanding that reader who's waiting for your book, it really does make a very big difference.
Absolutely. So just one of the ways that you talk about, Jenny, about narrowing, about finding this market in the Blueprint for a Book, the nonfiction version, and in the fiction version, is titles. So when you think about what your title is, your title's the first thing that reaches your reader, right? And your title can also, give you a grip on the book. And of course, titles change. Like, we all know that if you sell a book to a publisher, they may want a different title. When you get to the end of the book, you may find you want a different title. But to come up with something at the beginning can really help. So can we talk about the process of figuring out what a good title might be?
Oh, you'll probably hear me say this about every step in the Blueprint, but I think that finding a working title is one of the most magically powerful secret processes that is out there for a writer if they take it seriously. And if you take it seriously, you're out there looking at comps. You're thinking about that reader. You're thinking about your genre. You're doing all of that work. And the process of going through it it's like a sneaky portal through which you're looking at the entire book. Because I'm thinking about KJ, your title, In Her Boots. I feel like your working title was In Her Shoes.
No. My working title was The Modern Pioneer Girl's Guide to Life.
That's right. In Her Shoes is the Jennifer Weiner book.
Weiner movie.
Which made me a little anxious. I was like, well, I hope she's not going to be mad. But I think it's fine. So when I'm writing fiction, I tend to have like a working title that's sort of like my file name. And the funny thing is that in nonfiction, so How to Be a Happier Parent, that had a bazillion different titles as I was doing it. But every time I would describe it to someone, I'd be like, what's your book about? Well, it's about how to be a happier parent. And finally, I was like, wait a minute. Yeah, exactly. So I didn't come up with those to begin with, but I had a long list of possibilities, both in fiction and nonfiction. I'm working on a third book right now, and this is actually a piece of the process that I'm doing right now. It's what do I call it? What's my pet name for it? I guess.
Rona, what do you do?
I generally know my titles in advance. I've had a couple of titles come first, and something about them kind of dictated aspects of the story. I'm also right now on the third book of a series, and I don't know the title of the fourth book, and it's kind of, I know who the leads are, but it's driving me crazy that I don't know their title yet, because I know the title of the fifth book, so it's like, no, I need this one. There's a hole. But it tells your reader something too, because if I bring up a title like Where Have You Gone, Bernadette, you're going to have one image, as opposed to if I say A Court of Thorn and Roses. I mean, that one's become so well known that there's an incredible number of YA fantasy that's a something of this and that. It's become a trope in and of itself. But if you gave a book with that format of a title to an adult book or to a contemporary book, you would confuse a reader. So you'll miss the people who would enjoy the book because of that. The other thing that I know I do personally, once I have the title, regardless of how I've been published, is I tend to make a little graphic of it in my own little sort of pre-cover, and I tack that in front of me, and I see it, and it reminds me that this is going to be a book with this name on it, and that helps.
It does. on the nonfiction side, I deeply love working with titles, and I just think it's really fun. I think it's very market focused to think about titles. It's the primary tool that we use in the market, and if you pay attention to your own buying habits, you'll see that certain titles you're sold, but with nothing else. It's just the title alone will sell you. But I was recently working with an author who's writing a book about education, the state of education, and she runs something called a micro school, which is a thing that's beginning to pop up, and she was trying to wrap her hands around this idea and really having a hard time because the state of education, there's a lot of topics, there's a lot of splinter pieces to that. It's huge. There's everything from government and policy to parenting to, the things we learned in the pandemic to what is the point of education to, inequalities in education. Like there's so many pieces to it. So, she comes at this giant topic and she's trying to figure out her why and her point and narrowing down. And she's kind of circling around. But it wasn't until we started working on the title that the title actually began to inform the structure of the book, who her audience was, when she finally chose her title. And it's clearly not a great title. It's just a working title. But for her, the title was the decision. I am not speaking to educators and experts. I am speaking to parents. That was what my title took me to. And then the other piece, which she circled around, there were 4 things she wanted parents to know about schools and their kids' school. And I kept saying, well, what are these 4 things? And one day she said, well, it's the 4 flaws. And I was like, okay, that's the working title, the 4 flaws, right? And it's not the best title. Like I said, it will not end up on the book, but just the idea, like, oh, there's 4 flaws. I'm speaking to parents. I'm going to help them understand these flaws, and then I help them make a decision around these flaws. Even that, I'm helping them choose. I'm helping them decide. That all came from the title. And before she had that, it was just all over the place. And the title was vague, and it was just not descriptive. It was not helpful. So landing on the right title can in fact ripple out to every part of the decision about what you're writing.
Yeah, it narrows down it can narrow down your topic if it's nonfiction. It narrows down the story in memoir and in fiction. And that doesn't seem like it would be important because you're like, well, I know what my story is. My story is the story of whatever your story is the story of. But it's very easy to be like, well, and it's also this, and it's also this, and then she has this sister, and there's this bad guy, and if you've written Rona and the really bad dude, then your story needs to be Rona and the really bad dude. But if you've written Heartlace, then Rona and the really bad dude is not the story that you're going to write, right? I just finished a really fun book called Florida Woman, which is, by the way, it's a novel. Isn't that the best title? Right?
It is a good title.
Florida Woman. But
we all have immediate reactions to that.
Yeah. Don't you? And I can see, you can, as a writer, and I talked about how these processes help you read differently. So I can see the places where this writer Deb Rogers, could have taken this in other directions. But she was focused on, Florida Woman. Florida is Florida. It's swampy and animally, and Florida is crazy. And, crazy things happen to the Florida woman. And there's a monkey shelter, and it's really, it's funny. It's everything you want it to be. It's funny and intriguing and a little bit dark and a little bit creepy. Anyway, you could just see how having that focus kept her from going, oh, and there's also this whole backstory about this person's brother and her mother, which I would read that book, but
in Kentucky.
Yeah, exactly. But you better not call it Florida Woman.
Yeah, it's you're right. It puts barriers on things as well.
Good barriers.
Good barriers. We need barriers.
Yeah.
The other thing a great title does is raises a question of some kind. I mean, the Florida woman, right? You're like, wait, what? Who is she? Why does she have this label? It sounds like it's a label. It sounds a tiny bit derogatory. Like it raises questions in your mind. The other one you mentioned that's now out of my head. Oftentimes when titles bring together little tensions within the title, I'm thinking about Jay Shetty's Think Like a Monk nonfiction book. You're like, what? Think like a monk? That's it. Like a little, there's a little, like, how does a monk think? Like just a little tension or a little twist or a tiny little story, even within the title, helps to draw the reader in, but helps first at the stage we're talking about to define it for the writer.
Yeah. And that's important. That goes back to them staying in the lane that works for them genre wise and audience wise and all of those pieces, so that you don't start a romance that suddenly turns into a cozy mystery and then turns into a thriller, where, Jason Bourne like character suddenly shows up. And as Jenny, as you said, you will get people who have finished a novel, and because they haven't thought of these things, they've thrown in the kitchen sink, and you kind of have to pull it out and pare it down and
or you
find the story in the story.
Yeah, you didn't find your main thing, which is definitely a problem that I had in the first draft of the Chicken Sisters. I didn't know that it was really about the sisters and their relationship. So I wrote 46 books before that's an exaggeration, but not by much.
Maybe not.
Jenny, yeah, maybe not.
But if I picked up the Chicken Sisters and it was about,
reality TV. I mean, it is, and reality TV and restaurants are in it, but it's really about the sisters. And if you pick that up and the focus was all like the mechanisms of the reality TV, you'd be like, this is not really, if there better be some sisters, right?
Right. It's a promise. It's a promise to the reader. Genre, title
is a promise.
All these things are a promise to the reader, and you're making a contract with the reader. And we could talk about this for days, and I'm sure we will later. With memoir in particular, when you call something a memoir, you're making a promise to the reader that you are telling a story that is true to the best of your ability. It's the best of your ability to remember that what happened in real life and was true. And when the reader comes to that book, that's the expectation, which circles back to where we started, that they're bringing to it, and you can't break that promise. It's a very sacred trust, and all of these little bits that we're putting together about Marketplace go to that. I am, dear reader, I am making something for you. I would like you to have an experience. I would like you to have a sort of feeling at the end. I am doing this with intention for you. That's what all these things are about.
So Jenny, sorry, Rona.
Oh, I was gonna say it's a long-term thing too. It's, if you don't meet that promise, if you break that trust, you will sell one book to them, but you are not going to sell the second.
Yes. So Jenny, what should readers who are playing along with the Blueprint Book for a Book Challenge, or readers who just want to really sit down and dig into this themselves, list readers? I always do that because I'm thinking about readers, y'all, not listeners, but I am thinking about you. So what should listeners who are playing along with the challenge, or listeners who want to dig down more deeply into thoughts about the market as they're working on their book project, what should they do? Give us an assignment.
So the assignment this week is one of our longest. There are a lot of pieces to it, but they all go together and they're all really important. So what you should do for this week's challenge is come up with a working title for your book, name the genre for your book. And if you're writing nonfiction, name the category. Come up with two titles that are having a conversation with your book, that are comparable or competitive, but that your reader is going to read and know why you're choosing them. And then write one paragraph on your ideal reader, and not just, oh, they're a soccer mom and they live in the Midwest and, they have brown hair, but the pain that they're in, why they're coming to this book, what they're looking for when they're reading it, what they want from it, what they're looking for. One way to think about your ideal reader is, what are they going to search for in Google? What's the pain they're looking to, and it could just be, I want a great escape escapist novel. I want a great beach read. I want to, or it could be, I want to get into the head of a teenager because I forget what it's like and I've got one, or, some sort of thing that they need to write your ideal reader paragraph with that in mind will be enormously helpful. So these are all market focused assignments to help you really wrap your hands around, who am I writing this for?
So Rona, I want to thank you so much for being with us today.
You're very welcome.
Can you tell listeners where they can best find you? Website, social media?
Oh, I'm on social media way too much. They can find me on the web at ronagofstein.com. You can find me on Instagram at Write with Rona. That's where I post there. And then I do have a Facebook group as well with the same, Write with Rona.
All right. And you can always find us listeners on Facebook in our Facebook group, which is Am Writing Podcast on Facebook. You can find the show notes to this episode in your pod player, most likely, as well as at amwritingpodcast.com. You can sign up for this special episode or the special sort of challengey thing that goes with this episode. You can do that. I forgot to tell you all that at the very beginning of the episode, so we'll pop something in that it's explanatory. But if you go to authoraccelerator.com/amwriting blueprint challenge, you'll find out everything about the 10 episode series that we are doing on a blueprint book. You'll be able to sign up for a series of emails that give you every single assignment. And by the end of it, you will have a blueprint for your book. And if you're doing this contemporaneously as we are airing them, you'll be able to enter a drawing to have me or Jenny offer a critique on your blueprint and join you for a 50-minute phone call to discuss your work. There's also opportunities to commit yourself, and that means financially, to completing this process. You'll get an incredible bargain on a critique and a phone call with an Author Accelerator book coach. And if you're listening to these later, don't worry, head to that same link, authoraccelerator.com/amwriting blueprint challenge, and there are going to be things and ways to make this work even better for you. So all the details, authoraccelerator.com/amwriting blueprint challenge. I think I've probably said that enough. I think it's time for us to sign off. Jenny, do you remember our catchphrase?
I think so. Let me try. Okay. Keep your butt in the chair and your head in the game.
All right, we're done.
That was very stressful.